I look forward to introducing our first panel and a moderator. We are pleased to have Diego Munhoz, the tech reporter from Punchbowl. Diego, would you come up and join us with the panel? And also we have Tom Rinaldo, the Principal Director for FutureG at the Department of Defense, and Arpan Sura with the Chairman Brendan Carr's office, who is his Chief AI Officer for the Commission, as well as Head of Wireless in Space. Diego, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Thanks for joining. It's a hot day. Hope everybody got a glass of water or something to refresh. So very excited to be here today, talk about this issue. I'm sure we have a lot of GPS nerds here, but maybe we don't. So happy to explore a lot of these issues that impact national security, impact commerce, and very important. So like Diane said, I'm here with Dr. Tom Rinaldo from the DoD and Arpan Sura from the FCC. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So if you guys want to talk a little bit about what you do at the DoD and the FCC really quickly.
Yeah, sure, thanks. As it says, I'm the Principal Director of FutureG. So this is what we call Future Generation Wireless Technologies. It's one of the current 14 critical technology areas that the DoD under the Research and Engineering Undersecretary are focused on. So I get to work on all the research projects related to 5G, advancing 5G. More and more today, we're really focused on 6G and what 6G is going to mean and how we can be transformational in 6G and what the US can do to take advantage of this technology and what the DoD can do to take advantage of commercialized technology, as well as underpin the kind of economic sector of 5G and 6G as that is part of our major fights with our key adversaries right now, as they are trying to dominate the same technology that interconnects all of our worlds and all of our data and all this networking that's going to go into all the future of AI and advanced technology capabilities. So it's really a fun, very key position to be in right now to take advantage of this country's talents, focus them through the kind of defense lens, and really create some asymmetric capabilities for us.
I'm Arpan Sura. I'm the FCC Chairman Carr's Senior Advisor on Space and Wireless Issues. I direct and oversee the agency's domestic and international policy work that comes out of the Wireless Bureau, the Space Bureau, the Office of Engineering and Technology, and the Office of International Affairs. In addition to that, I have a separate position as the agency's Chief AI Officer, where we're trying to drive operational efficiencies and increase the agency's productivity by rolling out artificial intelligence tools and modernizing the government's workforce.
All right, two exciting jobs and clearly require being smarter than a reporter like myself. So let me start with you, Tom. Like I said, I'm sure there's a lot of people here that are nerds in this issue and know exactly what's going on with GPS and all of that. But if we could take a little bit of a step back, could you explain a little bit how GPS works and some of the issues that we might see with it?
Yeah, so of course the famous story is that GPS was kind of almost accidentally discovered as a tool for using timing from space when they heard Sputnik beeping as it was moving around, and they could use that to figure out position and therefore from that timing and from that position of that satellite. It has some really quirky bits to it. There's, I think if I recall right now, there's still 27 satellites up there. Your phone or your GPS systems are tracking, looking at as many of them as possible and using that very specific timing messaging coming down from it in order to solve that three-dimensional positioning problem. What's really fun about it too is it also is proof of relativity. You actually have to solve for general and special relativity in order to adjust for the timing, both advancement and retardation from both those effects as they're moving around in space. So it's been a really interesting science project, but it also was designed for military purposes of guidance, of weapons, of positioning, and information as we do our military purposes around the world. Opening that up to commercial industry and commercial use cases was a game changer for all of us. And I think we've witnessed that in our lifetimes over the past 20, 30 years of what it's meant to have that raw information in the palm of your hand, changing the way we do business, mixing with these cellular technologies that allow us to communicate, but knowing where we're communicating, where we are when we're doing it, has created the things like Waymo, Uber, all those stupid Lyft scooters that are in our ways as we're walking around DC, or use them to avoid the heat. I could go either way on if I like them or not at any given point. But yeah, so it really has developed into this. Now, one of the key aspects from the kind of technological side of it is the way that we solve this problem is to get the signal from space to your phone. The amount of loss of power before it hits here is dramatic, right? This is why SAT communications are so difficult, because the distance to travel, even though it's, you're pointing straight to the sky, even when we're in here, we can sometimes, often get a GPS signal. It comes in very, very weak, and so they've done a really clever thing where they spread the signal, and this is a classic thing in signal processing, is the more you spread the signal, the more resilient it gets. And the more you can kind of pull that signal out of the noise. So a really, really small signal, you can pull that out of the noise really easily. The problem is that small signal is still so vulnerable to jamming, which is why these GPS jammers and the problems that we're going to be talking about from both a military and as more and more civilian perspective, it becomes a really easy signal to jam. Now, there were both mathematical and technical decisions that were made to create the vulnerabilities that we see in these jammers. So military systems have a more robustness against jamming, but it's because we built in the technological capabilities to increase that. Doesn't mean that they can't be jammed. Most systems can be jammed depending on where you are spatially, the amount of power you're willing to put at that problem. But these are all interesting decisions that were made in order to create this capability, which has been fantastic, as I said, but now these days, and I'll talk more, I think, in some follow-ups here, about specific challenges we've seen around the world and have created to create these vulnerabilities that we're all worried about today.
Right, and when I told my wife yesterday that I was going to host a panel on GPS, she said, GPS, like my phone, like the map, Google Map. It's much broader than just the GPS we think of as maps, right? It powers financial transactions or infrastructure system. It really is. It's crucial for a lot of our day-to-day needs. And you said that it has certain vulnerabilities. How and that I'm sure that U.S. adversaries can exploit them. How do they do that? And we're on Capitol Hill. We're in Washington. What can policymakers do to address some of those vulnerabilities?
So back to the vulnerabilities first, right? Like I said, these signals, and when I move my hands like this is because I think spatially about signals. So if I do this, I'm talking about frequency, and if I do this, I'm talking about power. So you have this signal that's spread out over this frequency, and then you have these jammers, right? So these are just classic jammers that emit some energy, and that can even just be like a single pulse of energy, but big enough that it ruins the receiver's ability to see the signal that it's trying to see. So we saw this. So I used to work at DARPA, so the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and while I was there, I teamed with a specific special operations unit that was looking at this early on about understanding the vulnerabilities that this was going to create in our ability to wage war against an adversary that understood how to deny GPS to us. They were showing it to us in Syria. Russia was showing us their playbook in Syria by taking out what was called there's various names on them. The tent is one of them, or the R330Z, the zhidl. And that's the name of the Russian system that was deployed that creates a massive bubble of GPS denied area around CENTCOM. So we were dealing with that. We were seeing that happen. I'm going to be vague on some of these details for obvious reasons, but we were seeing massive loss of capabilities and ordnance because they were dependent on GPS. And as soon as they flew there, the tent turns on, capability goes away, we lose assets. We also watched the Russians miniaturizing this technology. So the tent itself was an interesting thing. It was 4 poles of antennas, a power unit and a command unit that they distributed. So you couldn't just attack necessarily one system, or if you attacked one system, you only got part of that. The antennas themselves were very small, what we would call like a radar cross-section. So it'd be very hard to guide a weapon into just hitting that section. And of course, any large platform that had a big enough ordnance to create a big hole in the ground would have been taken care of by some of the other short-range defense systems that the Russians had. So as they were building up their resilience to our air superiority, As I said, they were showing us their playbook. They took that into Ukraine, and we've been watching that play out over the past few years. So these are some of the significant the significant weapons of warfare that we're seeing out there. The other challenge, though, is that it's, as I said, it's very easy to jam these things. So DARPA ran a program called Improv. I forget, Improv was a clever acronym, but it was talking about improvisation. And the key attribute of this was, what can I buy on Amazon for less than $300 to create a really bad day for the American military? And GPS denying was one of the easiest things that you could just purchase enough tools online, put them together, and you could deny Dulles Airport from the middle of the Appalachians. So we see this as not just a weapon of warfare, but potentially a future weapon of terror, weapon of ransom. All these things are not too difficult to do. Final story I'll tell before I let Arpan speak. We were sitting there's an open source software conference that I used to go to every year in Brussels called FOSDEM. Don't worry about what it stands for, it's just called FOSDEM. One of our professors from Paris, he would do all these really interesting tricks, and he was learning all sorts of things every day using the software-defined radio stuff that I was creating. And one of the days, he actually turned on a GPS spoofer inside of that conference. Now, he kept the power incredibly small, so it would be impossible for it to leak very far out of there. We were also very worried about it, so we kept it on for about 10 seconds, where literally we popped up our phones, popped up Google Maps, and it was showing us in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So from a very cheap system, he was able to craft a thing that could tell your phone where you're not. And now think of what that would do if you did that to a self-driving vehicle, to an airplane, to one of our military systems. So again, not the math, the tech, all of that is not very difficult to develop these days.
All right, well, that all sounds very concerning. So having heard that, let me go to Arpan, because the FCC is actively looking into this. In March, you guys began to examine ways to complement and find alternatives to GPS. Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated this and what you're looking for?
Absolutely. So this is an item that Chairman Cart put out in his third month at the office. And it reflects the importance that we give to this issue. National security is one of his top priorities, and we recognize, as Tom mentioned, that GPS remains vulnerable to jamming and spoofing, but also non-national security threats like solar flares, environmental risks like orbital debris, and there is heavy reliance on it in the U.S. economy. Meanwhile, we have a number of parties and applicants, regulated entities, that are looking to develop GPS alternatives and complements. And to date, there has not been a USG inventory conversation, holistic conversation that has been happening about the state of these technologies, the types of spectral resources that are needed to enable these technologies. And as the commercial spectrum regulator, the FCC is in charge of assigning spectral resources, for setting the rules for how those resources can be used. So we have an important role to play in the development of these commercial alternatives and complements. And I can say that this proceeding has been more successful than I had originally anticipated. We've drawn out a lot of people who are coming out with really cool technologies and innovations. I've had a lot of conversations with folks in stealth mode. The environment seems pretty frothy. And there are a lot of commercial applications that are not really appreciated, but that are incenting companies to innovate in the space. And so we're very happy about the state of the conversation. We're seeing technology deployments across multiple verticals, whether it's satellite, terrestrial, broadcast, even over the top, where there's no infrastructure. We're continuing to have conversations, and we're excited about next steps in this proceeding.
And since you said you're excited about the next steps, you released a notice of inquiry in March. So what would be the next step, and what would that look like?
Stay tuned.
Now, so for land-based alternatives, I assume you'd have to shift around spectrum use a little bit. What could that look like? What do we have to change in how we use spectrum
Well, it depends on the spectrum band in question, right? Not all spectrum bands are allocated the same. Not all of them have the same service rules. And some providers may have different spectrum needs for their particular technology than others. And so that can't be answered in a vacuum. But, we are aware of, multiple terrestrial providers that are trying to leverage their spectral resources to have ubiquitous PNT alternatives or complements in the country.
And I think this goes to both of you, but we're talking about land-based alternatives. GPS is 26 satellites, right? You said. Why would we want a land-based alternative to GPS?
Well, I think we want redundancy. I think that's the biggest issue here. So from a military perspective, we always talk about the PACE plan, right? Primary, alternative, contingency, and emergency. You don't want to have a single navigation system that you're 100% reliant on. I mean, it wasn't, I forget, I think it was like mid-2000s when commercial airlines switched over to their primary navigation being GPS, but they still have backup navigation tools in there if their GPS goes down, it's denied, or they just don't trust the results that are coming in. So there's a handful of different levels of redundancy. We also witnessed that space is a contested area now, or it will be in future kinetic fights. We know that our adversaries are building anti-satellite technologies. We know we're watching them jam Starlink in the field. Now, the jamming of Starlink in the field is really a localized terrestrial jamming event, not jamming the satellites themselves. But there's still going to be this massive contest out there that we don't want to rely on a single domain, and we shouldn't want to rely on a single technology to do that. So you want to have multiple solutions that are special purpose for this, but you want to be able to have them as multiple levels of backup and redundancy.
Now, Arpan, you said you've had great conversations with a lot of the private sector players here. What are you looking to hear from the industry in the FCC's work? And do you think historically on this issue, industry and the government have been on the same page?
Well, I think to some extent there has been, ever since Trump won, going into the Biden administration and continuing on, there has been a good record of public-private partnerships from various agencies, whether it's DOD, DOT, whether it's test beds, prizes, contests. There hasn't really been a holistic government approach to developing an alternative or complement to GPS, and that's where I think the gap has been. That's where I think our notice of inquiry helps fill that gap to some extent, not completely, but to some extent. And there hasn't really been a conversation about like how the economics of this thing will work, right? Is there the capital to deploy at scale? Can the solution be monetized for applications that are sort of beyond sort of core national security purposes? Will there have to be a lot of capital expenditures to get this thing going? And so there are a lot of sort of ancillary business, issues that, are becoming increasingly relevant for policymakers as we're thinking about which of these solutions make sense and how to, foster competition in a way that'll, yield multiple outcomes.
Yeah, if again, Arpan's absolutely right. There's a lot of potential solutions out there. No one has made that big leap to say this is the architect of the future. Partly because I think we're waiting for a commercial industry to want to fix it. They're waiting for us to fix it. So I think having these conversations, and you're right, what the SEC is doing right now is helping create that room for conversation. Hopefully we can come out to it. Now, I will say that there's nothing like a threat to drive solutions, and that's what we're seeing at least around the world and overseas. So for instance, Turkey, they have, since they're, Syria's right there, Ukraine's right there, they've been surrounded on all sides by the GPS jammers the Russians have been deploying. And a lot of so you mentioned that a lot of other infrastructure depends on GPS. Well, so do cell phones. So the cell phone towers don't work along the coast of Turkey right now. So the Turkey Telecom actually worked with a company to do what's called time transfer. So if I'm in the middle of the country and I get a really good GPS signal here, and I tell one of my towers on the edge of the country that that's the time, you also have to know the latency for how long it's going to take to tell that so that it can actually have the exact same synchronized time there. Well, they've deployed this on their entire their network so that they can keep the timing correct and keep communications up. So the threat, which was driving us in the DoD to come up with alternative PNT solutions and worried about our weapon systems and our warfighters, they were looking at it from a commercial side. So this is starting to affect commercial industry. And one other thing, I literally just flew back from Lithuania last night. The Baltics are under the same threat. So Kaliningrad Oblast, which belongs to Russia, is also emitting GPS denied signals. You're getting some of that coming out of Belarus. And so the Baltics coming in and out of there on commercial aircraft. And I am not a nervous flyer. You can't fly around the world as much as I do and be a nervous flyer. That was one time when I was actually a little concerned about landing and taking off in Vilnius. So these are real threats to these areas, and I know NATO's very involved in that area in particular on this.
All right, Tom, you're really making the Rio now. But so we're almost out of time. I just have a quick last question, and please don't take too much time with it. But we have a couple of lawmakers speaking, and again, we're on Capitol Hill. Is there anything that Congress can do to help the DoD, the FCC on this issue?
So from my perspective, as we mentioned, there hasn't really been both that conversation, which is opening up now, or the willingness to drive towards a solution. And the problem is, of course, because there are many possible solutions, and we should have a level of redundancy built into the next generation of our PNT system that would complement and then or replace in certain cases GPS. Somebody needs to drive that conversation. I think that's the key thing here, is that there's been a lot of really good research projects and S&T development of optical clocks and quantum clocks and time transfer protocols and alternative approaches to using RF and communicating and understanding our position that way. Somebody has to really drive and say, we've got to come up with a solution. We got to, as Diane said, we don't have to wait until the threat's real here. We can make good decisions now, but somebody has to be pushing to say, come up with an architecture and execute on that.
Markets work. They involve a discovery process that involves trial and failure, and then ultimately success. But before you get to success, it looks messy, and it looks kind of like, a goat rodeo. And, we have to trust the markets. We have to understand that there's a lot of people vying for the solution space. There's a lot of discovery and search, and it's important that we don't foreclose that. It's a healthy process.
Got it. All right. I have to wrap up, but thank you, Tom Rondeau, Arpan Sura from the FCC, and I'll hand it over to Diane.
Thank you. Thank you, Diego. And to double tap on what Tom and Arpan both said, it's events like this that can bring policymakers and industry together to really educate them on what's needed and how to best move forward.